Hey, what's up, everyone? I got Wayne Bettis and Brandon Biggers with me today, and originally we were going to talk about the latest FanZ set Incursion. And I think, generally speaking, we didn't really have too much to comment on it. I think most people can kind of assess the card pool quite well at this point, is kind of what the conclusion we came to. So, I actually want to make a conversation today about the philosophy of design of FanZ. Guys, I want to talk about, for example, something on my mind a lot has been the mastery locking of more and more cards as the set has come out. So, great example of this set. We got a bunch of red cards for Relentless Mastery only. I really like the cards, but I really don't think that all of them needed the trait locking and the mastery locking. I really think that like it's kind of getting a little bit lazy to just immediately slap it on there, and I don't really think it's as necessary as it's been used, personally.
Um, I think in some cases it's not really necessary. I think a couple of examples. So I'm specifically thinking about Red Resilience right now. I think that card would be probably too good in Ascension Mastery, just because it's a block that raises anger and then goes on top of your life deck, and then when it's banished, you gain 5 stages. So you have two uninteractable anger, you gain stages. I mean, I feel like that needed to be away from Ascension for sure. Um, but I guess like some of my questions are there are a few cards in this set that just are obviously for the mastery that they're locked to. Like Saiyan Training Drill and Namekian Containment Wave. Um, like you're not going to run those cards except in Defiant and Radiant Mastery, respectively. So I guess I don't really understand the rationale behind some of that. I don't know.
Um, I agree. I agree with resilience not being able to be played in Ascension. I think that the skip is the main culprit of why that had to happen. That
Yeah.
would give Red another 2 anger block. Um, so that makes sense to me. And overall, as far as like the trait locking goes, um, it stinks a little bit because it kind of like narrows what's possible when it comes to deck building. But at the same time, if you take a couple seconds to think about why, you can normally come to your conclusion. And I think that I'd rather have that than have to have constant CRD updates. So I'm down. I'm down with the trade locking or the mastery locking.
In the case of Red Resilience, I think my biggest thing is you already can like. So let's say like what does Red Resilience enable, right? Red Resilience, in the
Mhm.
case of Central Mastery, enables you to what run more non-styled cards. So that means like theoretically, let's say that you're using this card specifically to make sure that you always land the skip, right? In Red Ascension deck. So is this a card that you're going to hold between passes for that? Is it that strong of a card to just and such a strong of a game action that you're going to hold this prevent block that can be sphered to sit on top of your deck when you could just build your deck with like 50 styled cards? Sure, you're playing the odds. It's more a consistency thing, sure, but I guess I don't see it in that particular instance being broken when you already have like blocking hand. You have all these other one anger blocks. Yeah, it's. I guess I just don't. I don't personally see that being an issue in that argument.
I mean,
Well,
if it
oh,
were me, sorry, Wayne.
go ahead.
Um, if it were me, I would absolutely hold this passing turn in Ascension. Just because it keeps you alive longer, and I'll say that one of the more um interesting things that the new trunk stack has enabled is adding a lot of consistency to Ascension builds that want to run Dragon Balls. And so just because the 4C helps you set those up as you chain those levels. Um, but I think that the Red Resilience, I mean, is
Well,
just
first
really
he goes at the
powerful
start of your
in that
turn,
build.
though. That's the thing. It's not an entering
Right.
combat. You draw the card that you're going to see. So I don't necessarily see how that. Yeah, you can dig in your deck quicker. That's what it does for Dragon Balls. But it's not like you're setting up that top for the Mastery and Ascension with that effect. You can't. So
No, no, no. But what I'm saying is that the 4C enables you to run more non-styled cards by itself. And so I think a card like Red Resilience it would increase that consistency. You're avoiding the punishment for running non-styled cards in Ascension, essentially, which is pretty much what you said. But I think there's other things in this set, like Trunks, that incentivize you running more non-styled cards in Ascension. That's my only point.
I think you guys are looking a little bit too deep. If you just look at it on its surface, right? Here's this block. It's a soft block, right? It's only prevent. But in Ascension, if you were able to play in Ascension, it essentially says, hey, gain 2 anger in 5 stages. Imagine that on any other block.
Yeah.
Because in Ascension, gain 2 anger, gain 5 stages, and your next attack, as long as you're gaining anger, you got like a 3 to 4 anger swing in one action. 100% of the time. That's not alright. I'm not even saying this is a card you hold. But remember, it stops it prevents any attack. If it just said prevent a physical, that's different.
Yeah.
So all they have to do is attack and you're off to the races in Ascension. That can't happen.
I guess where I'm at with it too is like if it was a stop, definitely too strong. But it's a prevent, which means there's levels of counterplay though. There's unpreventable damage, there's hit effects. Not that people are necessarily running hit effect anger, but it does exist, right? People still play Breathless, for example. I don't know if I can't remember if any of the new cards still have hit lower anger, but there are still levels of interaction with the card on top of it also being an event. That's where I'm like, yeah, it's a level of consistency. Absolutely, I would agree, but I don't think it pushes anything overboard personally. I think the big thing is the gain 5. That is good, sure, but like you can already build your decks in a way that you can pretty much guarantee the skip. And I don't see the consistency level of that card being in your hand in a non-style enough heavy deck. I don't see it incentivizing you enough to build a non-style enough heavy deck, personally. So that's I
don't think that has anything to do with it.
Well, that gives a consistency to it, though. That's the thing. It gives a consistency to the master to make sure you always have a skip.
Right. You raise some good points about like the attacks having like anti-anger on them. The issue is that the card that we're talking about is in the form of a block, right? So if the goal in Ascension typically a lot of the time is to gain anger and level, you have perfect information going into you playing the card. So if you see them throw the attack that has the anti-anger on it on hit, you might decide, well, this isn't the best time to kind of throw this block out that's going to gain me 2 to 3, 4 anger. I'll just wait until they throw their next attack, and then, I'll get my value that way.
So on the flip side of that, they've now landed the attack and pushed damage on you, which is pushing their win condition against you. So there's still a trade-off to it, right? It's not like it's an always evergreen card, which I think makes that card balanced and fair.
If it's a physical attack, though, you're okay eating that because you're going to gain 5 stages. It's I don't know. It's I feel like it's definitely a I would hate that if it were an Ascension. Just as somebody sitting across the table from it, I would want to flip a table every time that happened to me.
I guess I can think of other cards that I think are more impactful in that slot. And I don't think I guess I've already really made my point, but I guess I'll just disagree on that one. But I understand where you guys are coming from.
Give us some examples. Yeah, please. Like I'm not saying.
Well, a great example.
I just want to hear them.
Oh, let's say my opponent had like Blazing Aura, for example. I think Blazing Aura is more impactful than Resilience, and for different reasons. Granted, again, we're talking about a reactive card versus a proactive card. So, and maybe it's not a very fair comparison in that aspect. Again, I guess. You play any blocking in red, you're still good. You can build so easily around that mastery. I don't think that card gives you enough space to where you're cheating non-style cards that would have stopped you from getting that skip. I don't think it brings that level of consistency where that's where I would argue is why it would be too good in Ascension, where it's like letting you skip deck building constraints. That's where I would find it unbalanced, and I don't feel that it does that. That's the primary reason why I'm okay with it.
Brandon, do you have anything to add?
I feel like blocks in general have the ability to be more powerful than attacks, and specifically omni blocks. I think if it prevented damage from one type or the other, I would be
Mhm.
perfectly okay with this in Ascension. But I think the fact that it is universally playable in response to any attack your opponent throws, and then you have the ability to chain uninterrupted, I think that's what makes it too powerful. That's just me. But
I think that the last thing I'll say is I think that it going back on top and you having access to it 100% as long as your opponent throws an attack for the mastery is strong. But I think you get into like design space trouble and like sketchy situations where you start playing with like the skip aspect of things. As someone who's played like a ton of like oppressive, like I'm at like designing for that mastery and that strategy. Like I can't believe that was a mastery because like building a strategy around your opponent not playing the game is like you have to be really careful like that when you're designing cards. And I think that that's the main problem with this block is like you don't want, especially when like you don't want that to happen when the goal is to MPPV. Like if it was like yo, like if you do this, like we can't win by like MPV. That's different. But like not your opponent not being able to interact like that is tough to deal with, especially when you get it all the time, barring a sphere.
Yeah.
Like Frank, you're absolutely right. There's counter plays that can be sphered. You can take damage. You have to deal with hit effects. That's fine. But if you had to commit to it before you saw the hit effect, I would be like a little bit more on your side of the fence. But like, when you can see it and look at it, and you can like plan out the situation. And there's nothing your opponent can do outside of a sphere to get around what's about to happen. That's it.
No, fair. I'll say it's a 2-1. I'll say it's a 2-1 in you guys' favor. So let's talk about another
Civilized.
card. Hey, I'm more than willing to be civil about it. Like I said, I'm not too fiery about that card. But let's talk about some of the cards here that were mastery restricted. Let's pull one out here, for example. I'm trying to look at some of these other ones from this set specifically. I have stuff from other sets. I think
we can bounce around.
Yeah, no, I'm down for bouncing around. Well, for example, let's go on the opposite end of my feelings personally. So Black Spiteful Strike, it's that perceptive only physical attack that is a life card. Unstoppable, unmodifiable, considered to deal crit damage, hit raise lower player's anger one. I think that card is good design for a mastery that I don't feel like anyone's still going to play anyway. Like, I think Tien is the only MP that will maybe play that mastery, and then everybody else, like, you're better off doing manipulative if you're trying to do mill effects.
You have not been playing Eric lately, then.
Well, I was about to say, I wish Eric was here.
I have. I've played against Eric with it, and I'm still, like, most of the time when I'm playing against him, I'm like, I feel like manipulative would have been better. Like,
what? Really?
Yeah. I mean, granted, I'm not necessarily playing board decks all the time against it, so, like, in fairness, well, that's the thing, though. Perceptive itself is a matchup-dependent mastery, and even when we've had metas with very active boards, people weren't playing Perceptive. They played Majin Vegeta. They played control decks themselves. They played ball decks. They didn't play Perceptive as a counter to board. I feel like nobody's ever actually hard pivoted. And so while this card is really good for the mastery, like it's an excellent card. That card is a 10 out of 10. I mean, it's a 9.
Okay.
It's a 9 out of 9, but I don't think I don't think the card matters. I don't think ultimately matters.
You think it would have been fine in another type of mastery?
No, no, I wouldn't. I definitely probably wouldn't be able to. Well, let's look at the other black masteries, right? What mastery is going to break that card open? None of those masters can modify it. It's not an energy attack, so you can't do entry efficiency drill for like conflict or something, right?
I see what you're saying.
There's no synergy really with. There is no synergy actually, or no. Yeah. There's no synergy with manipulative if you use a block. Like that's one of those cards that's like a no-brainer. It's a perceptive card, but did it really need to be blocked? Not really. Not right now. So I should say.
I would say that Mischievous Beats would run this card, and I think they'd be okay with it. And the reason is because, well, never mind. I'm gonna recant my statement because I forgot Black Chin Kick as a card.
I'll say that I never thought of like you understand why Spiteful Strike is locked to Perceptive, but your angle and your argument, Frank, I never even considered why other masteries can't have it. and I think that they probably could and it would be okay. I can't think of a reason off the top why this can't be in Mischievous. But what I can tell you is that every time that I've seen this card played, it's been a blowout card. So, like, if you look at it, right, obviously in Perceptive it's nuts because you get to destroy something on the board. But essentially, this card will lower their opponent's anger too if you want. This card says, yo, this I get to destroy an ally or crit a ball. Like, now, the other Black Masteries don't excel at, like, ball decks or ally decks or anything like that. But, like, having a weapon like that, it's got to be valuable, right?
I think Mischievous Supreme Kai or any Mischievous Ball deck would like this card.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I can see the argument for like black control ball, because of their limited ball capture and crit control. But
like I'd run this over Sinister Choke easy.
But those decks having this card, those decks have not competitively existed for quite a while. And is that because they're bad, or is that because player perception? Would this card make those decks competitively viable? Would this card being unlocked add to a more diverse meta?
Probably.
I think the fact that it's there's nothing you can do about the crit, and you are automatically raising or lowering anger. I think the fact that it's uninteractable anger, uninteractable crit are both very, very powerful. And
well, sorry.
Go ahead. No, you're fine. Go ahead.
Well, let me shut up for a second. Let you finish.
No, I was just gonna say, we kind of brought this up before we started recording, but this mastery locking practice sort of design proofs for future issues as well. And so, I mean, maybe they make a black mastery in the future that has something to do with attacks hitting. You know, I mean, Spiteful Strike would obviously potentially push that over the top if that's something that was on the table. So, I don't know. I think that this could be very, very powerful in a couple of decks outside of Perceptive. So I'm kind of glad it doesn't exist there.
You know why it's probably good that this is locked? Because, like, obviously, mischievous decks are very good anger decks just by nature, right? And a lot of the times, like, they get stifled by cards like Wallbreaker. This card just says, like, yo, I don't care about Wallbreaker. This card can be picked up, literally picked up from anywhere by, like, Super Vegeta.
So,
and just now Go ahead.
Okay, see, I'm interrupting. Okay, well, great example, right? If this card was redesigned to, say, use a critical damage effect on hit versus the critical damage, a simple redesign would have removed that argument. Now, granted, I'm talking about hypotheticals here, but like,
it's still unblockable and preventable.
For one life card, it's not unmodifiable though. It's unmodifiable, unblockable for one life card.
Yeah, but that's not the important part, right? The important part is that it's crit damage that's going to get a wall breaker.
Well, but that's what I'm saying though. Is like if the concern is that. So to actually counter both, just to propose to both the arguments here, let's say we made it a hit, use a critical damage effect instead of deals critical damage, so we remove the wall breaker power, but then on top of it, it's like, sure, there may be future design that inhibits that we need to change the card, but we're playing in a fan virtual format, where at any point, they can change the text on the card. So why not make the card as open as possible when it's released, so that it enjoys more play in a farther diverse environment. And then if it's limiting design space in the design process, that's when you restrict it. Or if it's competitively wrong, then you restrict it. But in the meantime, even if they were developing the master that's going to come out in a year or two, why not just have it open for that time where it's not a problem?
Because then retro would be on fire when someone breaks it for a while, and no one likes to see and hear that all the time. And also, if Awesome Sauce gets to it and proxies go out, now we have to either redo them or just remember the change. You know what I mean? Even though we are virtual set, we still have, tangible cards. So I'm sure that that's annoying from time to time. So those are the only reasons I can think of off the top of my head.
I think it's also just, just from a design standpoint, it creates a difficulty. You have to review whether that card is actually broken, whether something actually needs to be done about it. You have to go into the work of actually changing it. You have to communicate that. I think there's a lot. I mean, I think there's a lot that goes into changing a card. I know it doesn't sound like a lot, but I don't know why suffer through that if you can just future proof it. I guess
Yeah.
is one thought I have. But
Well, and that comes back to the. I guess I'll say this. It kind of comes back to, I guess, where my argument is, my difference in philosophy with the mastery locking specifically, right? Is we can always change the cards. We can always take feedback on the cards.
Mhm.
And I think the most legitimate point, honestly, is more the physical aspect of it. When the proxies come out, okay, that's annoying, sure. But, like, I think there's a fair amount of stuff that's, like, such a no-brainer when you see it. Like, if you are, for such the dedicated community that we are, it's so, I think there are things that will always slip, but it's so easy to put an immediate fix on it, in my mind, in a digital age. So I guess just my philosophy, my personal philosophy, is very different than how we've been handling things. But
I also think that we've seen some interest from newer players coming into the game. And the reason I bring that up is I'm sure we've all had the wonderful experience of playing somebody and they're not up to date on the cards because they're a returning player or they're a newer player, and there's an errata to the card, and so they didn't know that it couldn't be played in a certain deck, or the damage changed, or it's now a hit effect, or whatever it is. I think it does create barriers for new and returning players, or people who just don't even read the blog.
yeah,
Like there's a bunch of people who show up to these events who are like, oh, I didn't even know there was a CRD that came out. So I don't know. I think that ban lists, errata lists can become really messy, and it is a I don't know. It's not a thing you want to see all of the time as a card game player in general. So I don't know, or maybe it's just laziness. I couldn't.
I guess I'll close by saying, I guess no one wants to work on the same thing or do the same thing twice, right? If you want to do, like, it's always easier when you're doing something to do it right the first time. So I'll say that first. And then I also makes me wonder, like, if you're designing a card, right? Let's say, like, you're designing a card and you're like, ooh, this would be broken with this, but it's not obvious. So, like, do I just let this go and maybe, like, hope they never discover it? Like, because, like, what if, like, when he was making Whis, he was like, oh, man, but that Gohan and Discovery, like, no one's going to do that. You know what I mean? You just hope they don't get it, and you just sit there and watch and know it exists and just let it fly. Like, that sounds like, I don't know. I wouldn't want to do that, because if they figured it out, then you're like, you look back and you're like, dang, man, I should have just fixed it when I had the chance. Now I have to change the blog, and we have to make all these changes, and I have to stoke the fire, like, try to calm the fires on Retro, and it's just a whole thing. I think if you can avoid it, why not avoid it?
well, I will say, we'll close on that argument. I guess this is kind of another, I'll say 2-1 in you guys' favor over mine here. So very understandable. I'm just very understandable points though. I mean, I'm not super hard on this card, like being like, oh, it has to be opened up or anything. I'm mostly like I really am for, like, as little restriction as possible. But I do agree with the idea that we should do as little as eroding as possible. We should make the game as streamlined as possible. But I think that is a nice jumping off point to all the times that we've errated Panini cards and the original ethos that we were going to never touch Panini cards if we didn't need to. And we've repeatedly hit Panini cards that have been arguably broken by FanZ creations. A great example.
Give us an example.
Yeah, I know. Let's look at a good example. Let's look at, like, right throw is a good one. Now, right throw is
Okay.
and, like, all the
That was my first one.
right throw is a great example where it's like, all right, like, Cell is the unintended casualty. I think the Awakening stack Gohan with having no native anchor support on it, right? I had no issues with right throw and interacting with the Mechian in that sense, right? It's when we get that fusion set Gohan that's all of a sudden a 3 anchor level 1. And a 2 anchor level 2 in Knowledge Mastery, and then we get the level 3, right? That is able to like is a very controversial level. Let's just put it to the side, not even talk about it for the sake of the argument. But we have this but what I'm getting at is we have this super loaded synergistic stack that is so obviously meant to be paired with the Machian, and specifically works really good with imposing a knowledge, right? So singular in design in that sense. Like, we end up having to hit right throw because the deck's anger becomes a problem, right? But couldn't we have done something with the stack differently before we even ever had to touch the right throw? Wasn't that such an obvious thing in testing, right? There's things like that happen. Curious what you guys think about this one.
Well, before I go, let me ask you one question before I go. It's like, okay, so if that's the case, like, what would you do? Like, you're saying that the problem was the FanZ card existing, ruining or not warping the effect of the PanZ card in the form of right throw, right? So if you're designing Gohan, like, what do you do? What do you do to fix it? If you don't want to change the Panini card, then what's the alternative? I guess is my question.
Well, great example. We've already known for Namekian knowledge specifically, right? Now, granted, knowledge was a problem for design space, right? Different conversation. But we know it exists. We know that we are not able to print cards that have both printed anger and rejuvenation on them because they're 2 anger cards in knowledge. They're only a problem in knowledge. But if the original ethos was to never touch the Panini game, you can't make stuff that breaks the rules that we've been following to keep the balance with the Panini cards. And then go ban the Panini card. Like, it breaks the original intent. Now, you can agree with whether they should have changed to the way that they've done it now, where they've been willing to go modify Panini cards or not. But it does go along the lines of making the game easier, bringing your old cards in. A lot of the returning players aren't familiar with FanZ, so touching the cards that they were playing with and they're doing different things is more confusing than goofing with new cards. Great example of Gohan. All you needed to do with that stack is to not put both those two things simultaneously on the stack, because you know that he can interact with the Namekian. If he was literally any other MP that had Rejuve and Anger, he'd be fine. Anybody that's not in like Knowledge Mastery or I guess Saiyan Empowered, right? So I guess they should have just done a different design. They could have literally transplanted that design on Piccolo for all I care. You know, there's a number of things they could have done.
Well, I think they, I don't know, and I've expressed some frustration about the design philosophy of designing a mastery and then designing an MP that very clearly will outpace every other MP in that mastery for all of time. So, I mean, imposing a Gohan, Mimicry, and Boo, you know, we see these examples throughout the game where it's clear that they sort of railroad design a little bit in that way. I also think maybe there's some unintended consequences of that, and I think the Knowledge Mystic Gohan interaction is an unintended consequence. I don't think they were processing that, oh, well, people aren't going to play this in imposing, they're just going to plug this into knowledge.
Yeah. This is tough because personally, I don't think I really started having issues with right throw until Dende came along. And Dende was allowed to use it anyway. And he was a bigger of an offender in my eyes because he could always produce the Dragon Ball. So every time you saw a right throw, they're getting maximum value out of the card. Now, I'm sure that when they designed Dende, they say, well, they just look at his AT and they say, well, no one's going to want to use right throw. But again, this brings us back a little bit to the conversation we were having about the red cards. It's like, well, when you warp the win condition to NPPV, all of a sudden, half the card, the AT plus 3, doesn't even matter. What matters is I'm able to produce the anger, which is getting me to the win condition that I want. So, I mean, I'm sure, like, I've seen the imposing Gohan decks and stuff, but, like, I was never really a fan of those decks because they were so suicide. You know what I mean? Like, I'm not saying they were bad. They were just never my cup of tea because I thought they had a glaring weakness in the fact that, like, the deck had, like, next to no endurance. So it's like, sure, you can get your anger, you can progress through your levels a little faster, but, like, if you get hit, you're going to fold. And I thought that was a good balance. So I'm never a fan of them changing the Panini cards either, but, like, if the alternative is like, yeah, we have to throw a whole stack in the trash or make or design it to be less impactful or powerful that you might teeter totter to a point where now no one wants to play the new MPs because they aren't as strong as either previous MPs or obvious choices that could have been made. If that results in us saying like, hey, this card has a trait on it, maybe just I don't know, bring CRD to the event or post about it more or make it more widespread so the new players are privy to what's going on. But I don't know, designing a weaker stack and just like throwing a trait on something, even if it's a Panini card, just seems like an easy fix. Now, when you start changing like text of the card, I feel like that goes into a new realm when it comes to like us changing Panini cards.
And that I think, is what they've said was their goal, was they didn't want to change the text. They wanted to limit or ban Panini cards. So, but I mean, I would argue that right throw was a problem with Knowledge Mastery in set 1. Like, I don't think that card ever should have existed.
I'll raise you. I'll say knowledge was always the problem.
Oh, for sure.
It's always been same thing. Empowered is designs cramps design space. So does knowledge. So does Enrage Mastery.
Yeah.
So
there's no way in hell they expected Dende in knowledge.
Yeah.
Like there's no way that they processed that. But then I mean, and you and I had this conversation, Wayne, shortly after Supreme Kai last season. That there's so much that those two cards brought to each other, Dende and Knowledge Mastery, that is just not present on the stack. Like you cannot see the value until you just start doing the interactions in that deck, and it just snowballs. So I mean, it wouldn't surprise me if they didn't sit down and think, oh well, if they just see a Dragon Ball, nobody can take it. Dende's off to the races in knowledge, and there's nothing anybody can do about it.
Yeah. It makes you wonder how often that happens. How often do they things go under the radar and then it starts getting played and they go, oh well, shit, we didn't even see that. And they do their due diligence. I'll say they definitely send the cards out to a select group of players and they test to see if they can break it. And we haven't broken anything. Nothing has been broken in quite a while. So
yeah. I think so. Let's talk about Denny, but let's talk about the fusion set, right? Because that's actually we talked about a number of cards and changes that all happen in fusion set, right? The number of the problems of, for example, MPs being way too designed for a specific mastery or vice versa. We're talking about Dende comes out around he's the OP set. I think he's after. I can't remember if he's after fusion, but he's before I think the movie collection set. I think right. I think is when he comes out.
I think that sounds about right.
I think that's for the rough timeline here. Let's start with let's say, I would say Mimicry, Enhanced Mastery, and then I would argue Energetic Mastery. All are masteries, and Imposing Mastery. All are masteries very, very much designed for the MP that they were paired with, right?
Yes.
We were all playing back in the time when Energito was a thing, how obviously overtuned that was, right? Just completely ridiculous. You have, and in the same vein that you can argue, you look at the Dende, you can say the Dende stack was an unintentional, how did you not, you can see how people didn't see how Knowledge Master and Dende interacted with each other, right? But for me, it's I guess I just look at all of these as, I'm going to put all of those as examples of they're so obvious. They're so one-sided, if you had to design a perfect MP for those masteries, that was the set in which your opposite was the perfect master or MP for it. Enhanced Mastery with Gotenks, honestly, even right for the synergy in which those two work together.
Yeah, and then and it was kind of funny because Gotenks ended up not even being the best MP in Enhanced. That was obviously Broly, I would argue, just because of all the synergy he had, and I mean, and you had success with Future Gohan, and I mean, it was just kind of funny to me because some of the best cards in Enhanced ended up being villains only. But it was clear that they were shoehorning Gotenks into Enhanced. And I think that, I mean, but you and I were the only two people playing Knowledge Dende for forever. And we played him almost right after he came out in Knowledge. And
both of us top cut Octagon events and stuff, right? I think you at least top
Uh-huh.
cut. So it's like,
Yeah. I mean, TJ had Radiant Dende that he ran with some success as well.
Pre Unleash nerf.
Yes, yeah. So it was, I mean, it didn't seem like a problem because nobody had explored it, I think. And I think maybe that's part of the issue too, is we just don't have enough ingenuity in the community sometimes because, I mean, is it worth digging into the dregs of all these cards when there's 20 people per event on a good day? Wouldn't it just be easier to just run Piccolo and Vegeta? You know?
I think to some degree to cop back on like what Wayne said is where it's like, even if there are some combos if nobody's playing it, is it worth going and messing around with? Yeah. I guess I bring up all those MPs partially because it's like, obviously this is a very egregious example of what we're talking about. But on top of it, I find all of those examples incredibly in your face. Mm-hmm. And in the example of Dende being around for sets, Dende got increased support as the sets went on with cards like Skillful Parry, Distress, making downtime.
Yeah.
And we knew knowledge was already very strong. And those cards were really only issues in knowledge, in my opinion. And so it's like, it's just, I think it was more like the disregard. It felt like more like a disregard for the Panini cards, and then we end up hitting the Panini cards. Now, again, I agree with knowledge, for example, going, but like, it's just, they didn't design, I think, around the Panini cards, and that was the issue to me, more than it was like Dende. And in the example of the Fusion Set Masteries, they tethered the two things together too much. On top of, they set like a new level of power creep in that set that just completely changed the game on top of it.
So do you think it was like an issue of tunnel vision?
I think it was. I think Fusion was a massive tunnel vision. Incredibly so. I think they've gotten better, as Wayne said, about releasing cards that are much more balanced. But we saw it in Super Premier Set again when we got Goku. And you could even argue, I mean, you look at all the nerfs that Empower decks got hit with. When we made all these overtuned cards for Enlightened that are all of a sudden a problem with Empowered because Empowered was just a better mastery. So
yeah, and I think that happened with Orange Adaptive as well. There are all these cards that were intended for other masteries, and they're just all. I mean, that's been Orange. The life of FanZ is every time you make a drill, you might have intended it for one deck, but it ends up being thrown into what already exists because it's so synergistic.
Yeah, I think Orange is a very special case. I think the other styles, they differentiate. They have multiple archetypes, whereas Orange is just drill playstyle, and then you pick your package. But it's the core is the same in every Orange deck, right? The other masteries, the other styles have much more differentiation. So.
Mm-hmm.
Wayne,
you're quiet. What do you think?
Yeah, what you cooking there?
Yeah, you guys have been ping ponging. I think that first of all, I'll talk about the couplings of masteries and MPs being in your face. I think it's always been like that. Like from the premier set, like masteries usually worked well with MPs that were next to them, and I think that put people on a line of what to play, but I think it also defines like what we would consider a meta. Like you would see like Knowledge Piccolo and you would see Black Krillin. They all came in the same box, but that doesn't mean like you can't put Krillin in red and there be some synergy. But like, where does that fit? I think that when the masteries and the MPs come out, it kind of like gives you like a cookie cutter. Like this is the meta at the start. So when the set comes out, this is what there are 4 decks, let's say, for example, 4 or 5 decks, and these decks are good. We're giving you these as free squares. Like if you put this MP with this mastery, you will have synergy. And then I guess as the set comes out, we play with those decks. We start to see what it's good at, what some of the weaknesses are. And when you notice those weaknesses, you're like, well, if I were to couple this with this would also be good. Now, is this good enough to hang with the other 4? I don't know. And that's where the ingenuity comes in. That's my only point that I remembered from what you guys talked about. I know you guys touched on a couple points, but I can't really remember. But I definitely want to talk about the mastery and MP thing. It's been a thing for as long as this game's been a game. even back to the score days. Is that bad? I don't think so. I think that it just kind of like forces you in a direction, but us as players and gamers are going to take whatever pieces we have and try to make something cool. So
I
I don't know.
I don't think you're wrong, but I feel like it was less overtuned in Panini days. So,
The
for
card pool was
instance,
smaller.
that's fair. But for instance, Goku and Adaptive were paired together. And, it made a lot of sense. Goku finds drills, Adaptive is the drill mastery, works really well. But if you look at something like Aura Goku on release, there was no MP in Aura Mastery that was ever going to match Goku pre-nerf. It just wasn't going to happen because nothing could attain to those heights. I feel the same way about Mimicry with Boo. You're never going to make a Mimicry deck that's as good as Evil Boo. You're just not, because he has too much support for it, and just everything feeds it. Same thing with Imposing and Gohan. I don't know. I feel like it was less shoehorned, maybe, in the older days. And maybe that's just my recency bias. So,
well,
you raise a lot of good points to allow me to counter, right? All the decks that you just named were very strong, at their genesis. However, they all had their counters if you just take a second to think. I think that we get so wrapped up when new stuff comes out is that it takes us a while to think. And Goku at release, absolutely insane. Absolutely crazy. But his main weakness was what?
de-leveling.
You de-level him. So now you have to... Go ahead.
I'm not saying those decks don't have weaknesses. I'm saying there's no other MP that you can put in that deck that's going to be as good.
I agree with you 100%.
So I guess that's my issue. I've messed around with Mimicry a lot. I love Mimicry Mastery. But every single time I make a Mimicry deck, it's never as good as Evil Boo. And it won't be.
Yep.
And so I guess that's my thought on that design philosophy is I agree with you that it's not wrong, and I really like the way that you expressed how it's almost like, hey, here's your free square, and as because we have 2 more sets after that with just MPs, we don't have Masteries, and so people are free to experiment with those things, but it needs to be less powerful, I think, of a combination so that we can have room to innovate.
Well, go ahead, Frank. You've been waiting.
No, well, I'll let you go. I've been writing stuff down, so I can pick up whenever.
Okay. I think that they do need to be powerful, because if they're not powerful, they won't be played. I think the balance is that if you make something powerful, it has to have a weakness. And I think that they've pretty much done that. With you mentioned Enlightened, and Imposing and stuff like that. Again, I still think that they had issues with endurance. Now, as the supplementary sets came out after the Mastery, they kind of fixed it. But as you add pieces, you add new players to the meta as well. Decks that are a thing that couldn't be a thing because certain cards didn't exist so they could thrive. So I think that it happens as the sets come out, and I think that it's a good balance, because if I'm being honest, this isn't the only game. Like you guys, I'm sure you've played other card games. This game has been out for over a decade, and there has been no rotation.
Yeah.
This game should not work. The design, when you take a step back and you think about that, this should not work, and it works. That in itself is a marvel to me.
I mean, that's very fair. That's very fair.
You know what I mean? Now, I think that... I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, you're fine. I want you to continue. Go ahead.
All right. I'm almost done. I think that the card pool being so big and it still being a cohesive game with the amount of changes that have to be made is crazy. But I do think that the game could gain getting rid of some of the older Masteries, because they do restrict card design. Now, recently we got new tools when it comes to deck design in the forms of traits and mastery locks. But prior to that, look what Knowledge did with Dende. You know what I mean? If all the set one, and that was one of the last, that and Adaptive, one of the last Masteries to go from the premiere set. So I think if that would have happened sooner, Like, sure, some cool decks now are no longer a thing. However, overall, things are a lot more healthy. You know what I mean?
And I think a lot of the criticism, especially in our current meta for the game, a lot of that criticism, and and I find it funny because we both ask people the same question, but a lot of that criticism comes from people who have not played other card games, and at least not competitively. And so, they haven't gone through the hells of Esper control in Magic, and stuff like that. Where yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Where there's 3 good decks, and you either play one of those 3 good decks, or you play something that can beat the one you expect to see. And that seems to be the complaint that people have is, well, I either have to play what's good or I have to play what beats what's good. And I can't.
That's the nature of competitive.
My own thing. It is, and I think that there are a lot of people who don't understand that when it comes to competitive card games, and so I think that that's a barrier that we have because, frankly, I think we're in the best meta we've ever had in this game.
It's been good for a while.
I think it's the most fair. I think the best decks have weaknesses, and I feel like the design team has been really responsive to the community in what the community feels is dominating or needs just a little bit of tuning. And I think especially with this latest CRD, they've done a really good job of adjusting instead of just wholesale nerfing things. And I don't know, I'm a fan of the approach that's been taken.
You're a fan of Z.
Sure. I'm a fan of Z. I am.
It's good, man. I agree with like almost everything you just said.
Well, you're supposed to argue so we can create content.
Oh yeah, no, I will say this: the moment
Here it comes.
I will. Oh no, it's all good. I for every note that I've taken here, I think Wayne kind of very much solidified and kind of ended the argument. Like you said, if you look at this outside of the context of the game, right? Compared to the health of the other games in terms of a competitive meta, this is like the healthiest card game meta you're ever going to find in your life. That is something. That says something to the degree in which we have balanced the game, right? And at least design has been healthy enough that has allowed balance to persist. There's been times that we've had to step stuff back and nerf stuff, absolutely. Nothing's going to be perfect. And ultimately, at least for a while there, it was almost like we were ultimately like the final testers. That's how it's felt. I think the super sets, the super era has been different. I think the pre-super era, there was a lot more imbalance. There was a lot more head shakes. There are a lot more questions I had in terms of design and also balance. And I think that's one thing is like design and balance are not the same thing. They're two different things. They end up being a large part of the game. They make the game together, but they're different things. And I think at times we've kind of conflated the two when we're talking about points, but the game is healthy. The game is a healthy meta. I might not like and agree with the design philosophy of the cards I brought up earlier, for example, like the black, I already forgot the name of it, the black card for Perceptive, and
Spiteful.
Thank you, and the, what was the other card? I already forgot. What was the card we brought up? Resilience, Red Resilience,
yeah,
right?
Resilience, yeah.
I might not agree with how they were ultimately implemented in the philosophy, the philosophical arguments of why they were designed with the limitations they were, but they still function. They still are they feel, at least of now, as they were balanced cards. So we are in a very healthy game. Absolutely. I absolutely agree. And I think it's a galaxy brain take to understand that in a outside of just the vacuum of this game, this is an incredibly healthy game. And that is something that should be applauded and respected. And I think that is something that is lost a lot of time when people are making their arguments. And like you're saying, Brandon, a lot of time the people's criticism, they're evaluating in a vacuum, either with not enough playtime on the game, or with a super hyper-focused perspective on only a select number of decks in the game. And so I think that's, I guess what my main takeaway is, I think like I really can't even bring up any more criticisms I have because of like, you look at the take, it's like, it feels like I'm arguing minutia at this point with the way that you put it to words, Wayne. So very nice.
But you make a really good point about the pre-super era and the post-super era, and I would highlight that the main difference between the two has been the traits. The superset is when we got the traits, and once you're able to design cards with under traits and mastery locking, it kind of unlocks a different level of control when it comes to like what can be done and what can't be done that we didn't have previously. And if you're not a fan of that, you should try to remember what it was like before we had it. Not you specifically. I'm just talking about in general.
Well, I will say we've had the traits since like set 10. In fairness, I think that's when they came out. But they were arguably a lot of conversations a lot of us had were that they were underutilized or they were utilized wrong. The meme was always like, "Oh, humans get the best cards. Orange humans get the best cards all the time."
Mm-hmm. I guess what I'm trying to say is like we saw a higher uptick around the time the Super came out. There was a lot more cards playing. Prior to that, there weren't that many. But you are right. I'm off on that.
Well, you're not for that. Well, you're still right. Your point is right, though.
Well, I can't be right all the time.
I think the traits were. I mean, they were a huge boon to the game, and I think it started to. I mean, it opened this design space tremendously, and it really allowed them to make cards more powerful for certain MPs, and I think that's always valuable when you can create a card that's like, okay, this is good, and then now if I'm Gohan, it's great, and I love it. So I think that's, I mean, it's been really powerful, and I do think I agree that they're completely underutilized, but now we're really starting to see. It's almost like they're just starting to come into their own in using traits for design. So I think it's strong. I guess on that note, I'd like to bring up that I think Desperation is starting to improve in every style except for Saiyan.
Yeah.
Except for Saiyan?
What are y'all's thoughts?
Oh, man. Yeah. I was walking today, and one of the things I was thinking about, I had like a 30-minute long conversation to myself walking by the lake, and I was just talking about Saiyan to myself. I was just talking about Defiant. I was talking about Saiyan's design of the last couple sets, and I'm like fundamentally against how they've been implementing Desperation and Saiyan. I shouldn't say how they're implementing Desperation. I am fundamentally against how they have been making Defiant playable. Instead of making cards that synergize with a discard effect or that really like make you want to go tutor for them and go negative, we are creating cards that cheat the whole mechanic. And that Distortion Drill is a good example, right? We have two cards that do the same effect. There's Distortion Drill and Distraction that came out in Distraction's from Universal Clash, correct? And then Distortion is drills from this set.
Training Drill is
training Drill, not Distortion Drill. Sorry, Distortion Drill is that one with Vegito on it.
Vegito.
Yeah. But we're getting cards like that. We're getting cards that say, or we're getting all these cards that say you're considered to have no cards. But we're not getting cards that we actually want to go search for. We got blocks. Okay, that's good. We have the blocks. That is necessary. As far as I'm concerned, those things could be blank for effects. The fact is, like, they have Desperation. Their tutorable makes them good. But we're not getting cards that are worth tutoring to. We haven't gotten any that I feel are making that impactful. And so it's like, if I'm just going to play this Mastery, then I'm just going to stuff my hand with cards, which is counter to the whole mechanic we designed this Mastery to work with. Like, you're playing all these cards. I'm not going to be able to use my prevents. I can't use the Desperation effects unless I want to use one of 3 or 4 designated Desperation MPs. But guess what? None of them have Desperation online until they're on level 3. Kaba's the one exception, and you have to draw his name card. Kaba is like got the Videl effect, where if you draw the name card, super great. His stack is better than Videl's. But if you don't draw the name card and you're playing all these Desperation cards, it's super inconsistent. And so I have just like a massive bone to pick with how instead of doing all these stupid cards that cheat the mechanic, make cards that synergize when they're getting dumped, or give me board cards that do stuff with Desperation. Give me good reasons to dump my hand, or stuff that says discard a card to do X. We don't have that. We just don't.
I think that I would rather just see more powerful Desperation cards in Saiyan. Like, give me an orange charge blitz in Saiyan.
Nah, bro. Frank, listen, bro. You just made a great point. about that, about how counterintuitive it was to fill your hand when the whole goal was to not have cards in your hand. That is a great
Yeah.
point.
Yeah.
But Brandon, I think that you have to be extra careful when designing cards that you want to be good that are in the Defiant Mastery. Because if they're too good, guess what? You can have them all the time.
Yeah.
That's bad.
No, I 100% agree with you on that point.
Yeah.
And honestly, I think that was my concern when I saw Defiant.
Yeah.
I said it to a couple of people that the Mastery is going to be so easy to break
Mm-hmm.
if they're not careful. But I don't know. Like I just don't feel like there's certainly not an attack that's worth it for me to go get by discarding 2 cards from my hand.
There are some good ones. That's the thing, though. You never have to discard 2 cards from your hand, so it is okay. There's 2 of them that are good. One has the remain, and the other one is like focus and makes your next attack focus. That card's good because it has anger.
Flurry and homing beam.
That one is really good.
Homing beam. You know what I mean?
Yeah, homing
beam. But I've been playing a lot of Saiyan, and I can vouch for, especially what Frank is saying about your cards never being you're never having desperation. You always have so many cards in your hand.
Yeah.
But it kind of like makes you play the MPs that allow you to get around that, like the Gohan and, like you said, Kaba, Frank, and in some ways Trunks. Trunks has a couple of effects that he uses that you have it until the beginning of your next action.
Mm-hmm.
So it allows you to get whatever value, add the card to your hand, and then you can just use the Mastery for free if they decide to attack you, because you're considered to have less than, like, one of those cards in your hand. So that's kind of cool. And the blocks are very generic, but they have an extra synergy with cards like Trunks because they have Rejuvenate after use. So he's able to use those effects that get it from the bottom, so that makes them valuable to search as well because they turn it into double blocks.
Right.
So what they've done is they've created a situation where Defiant is good for certain MPs, but not all. There's a very select few that you can play it and get around or cheat around, the nombo that filling your hand with cards creates. So I'll say that I hated Defiant when it came out just because we only had, like, the Desperation cards were limited. And I was like, none of the, like Brandon said, none of these cards are good enough for me to pitch 2 for. None of them. But as they've given you ways to fill your hand up, you kind of like beat them with just attrition. Mm-hmm. Like, I've been playing Defiant Trunks. Very, very often I have 6-7 cards in my hand. And it's just like, you could have drawn all blocks. I don't care. You're still going to feel, this is going to be bad for you. So
I think my issue with that, though, is half of your mastery is blank at that point.
What do you mean?
I mean, like, your prevent is never live.
It is.
And that's one of the coolest parts. Well, I mean, at the end of combat, sure. But, I mean, I guess because the MP says, like, you have no cards in your hand until the beginning of your next action. That's cool, I guess. I don't know. I just feel like, why make Desperation a mechanic? Why make a mastery based around the Desperation mechanic just to make 3 MPs that ignore the requirement?
That's a question.
Well, and again, it's like, even with the MPs, it's like, let's okay, I'll drag up the skeleton, fusion MPs. All those MPs of those masteries right out of the gate access full synergy with the mastery. Mm-hmm. The new super MPs that are supposed to work with Defiance that you're talking about, so Kaba, Trunks, Gohan, they don't get to cheat the whole thing until 3. And then you have to supplement it with cards that cheat the whole mechanic that are arguably just dog water themselves. So,
which one was printed in this set?
But
Quick Blasts.
But I will say this though, like Wayne is saying though, it's like the fact that there's like these hardcore synergies, like Trunks with those blocks is incredible. That's a crazy synergy. Are you kidding me? Those blocks can be essentially blank, but the fact that you get a block, the whole point you're playing a block is to stop something. It accomplishes the job. It's consistent. It's the same thing as Red Resilience, honestly. It's just in the reverse order of the deck if you think about it. So
that's a fair point.
Even something it's so in the same way that you said it's easy to break, it's like, well, anytime you have a tutor, you have to be really careful. And the moment you put the fact that they put a tutor on mastery is insane. It's just we haven't gotten anything that general consensus is that there isn't anything good enough for most people to want to explore with. Now, is that the actual case in practice? I don't know. I haven't played it since before. I haven't played since the beginning of Universal Clash, so I haven't played it with
No,
new
it's pretty good.
cards. So
It's pretty good. It's pretty good.
Yeah,
Go ahead.
I was just gonna say my goal was to not use any of the any of the MPs that ignored the requirement, because I just wanted it to be good. Because I love +1 life. I love preventing. I'm like, this is really strong, but
Mhm.
I don't think it's ever going to be over the top unless you have an MP who cheats it.
And that's okay, because there are a handful of them now. It was a little sketchy when it was just
All of
Kaba.
them.
You shouldn't. You shouldn't.
I want to
You
play
know,
Vegeta.
nah, we'll play him in Oppressive or somewhere else, dude.
Yeah,
Don't come
I
over
know.
here with your Vegeta. But like, I found that what you have to do is find a way to level. And luckily for Saiyan, they actually have some cards with some anger on them. So when you build your hand up to 5 and 6 cards, you're able to progress through your levels and get to that level 3 you need to get to. Just like Saiyan Training Drill, the new drill that came out, just allows you to just +1 with it in your hand. So if you couple that with, let's say your Trunks, for example, you're getting a double block off your block, you're getting a card from the Mastery. Now you have 6 cards. That should be enough to get you through a level. You know what I mean? And God forbid if any of your MPs have actually anger printed on them, you may progress through 2. All the while doing very, very considerable damage to your opponent. We talked a little bit about Homing Beam a second ago. There's another card from set 16 that's like it has remain 1 if you're in Desperation. So just at the end of your flurry, hey, here's 2 5 life card energy attacks. Here's a 6th of your deck, just because I have this card. Or I can search it with my Trunks level 3 and throw it and just deal 10 casually.
Yeah, Flurry is a great card, but you're in a Mastery that doesn't support stage gain. And like you're saying, right, when you have all the pieces out and you're treating a big hand, right, you have all the cards out that give you +1. The majority of Saiyan's cards are 1 anger cards. And I feel like most people should be running anger hate. So I guess in my experience, like, yes, you can definitely get those combats where, your opponent doesn't have an anger interaction. Great. You have a 6-card hand, you're going to make a level. You might make 2, like you're saying, if you got on stack. But that has not been, in my experience, that was never the case. It was always like, do I have to see an Unleashed? But all those MPs you mentioned we're talking about, they have some of the strongest level 3s in the game. Kaba level 3 is probably one of the best level 3s in the game. Definitely top 5. Gohan level 3 is honestly really good. Trunks level 3, really good, like you're saying. Being able to go get a Flurry, for example, and have it online, and have the Master in line. Like, so it's like, it's kind of like, it's just the fact that you have to work so hard to get up to those levels, in my mind. Like, you really have to draw really right, and you have to, like, you're behind from the get-go to invest in the late game. And I don't think it's at least obviously good enough to me personally. I don't view it that way. But it sounds like you're more favorable on it. I don't think the Mastery's bad. I just think it needs more pieces, personally.
There are ways to do it. This is the last thing I guess I'll say. And shout outs to Nate, because he kind of put me onto this tech when we went down there for his event. Is like, if you don't want to gain the anger, that's cool. There are different ways to do it as long as you're not Gohan. Like, you could knee clash and then play Clash of Wills. Now you gain the 6 anger, or you can there's that physical attack that does AT4. They can't jump and gain more than 1 anger. You can do that, and you
Severing.
you can Severing Punch and then Unleashed, and there's a bunch of ways you can cheat, your levels. However, it takes up deck space. So obviously Gohan can't do it, but like you're saying, if you're trying to get to the best level 3 in the game, then that's what you got to do, and then you win from there. So you're right. A lot of the anger cards, barring like Sand and Rage, do only have 1 anger on it. But there's so many different ways you can do it. You just have to kind of figure out the balance of how many deck slots am I willing to spend to ensure that I get up to that level 3. That's kind of like the balancing act. So.
You make good points, Wayne.
Yeah, very good points.
Enraged is crazy, bro. 2 anger, draw a card, because you're leveling off it a lot of the times. So really, if you can land that, you only have to get the 3.
Yeah,
and then you get not only the card, but you also get your next MP's action as well. Like he's a snowball. But
Yeah.
I'm sorry, Brandon. Go ahead.
No. Yeah, I mean, I'm a noted Saiyan rampaging player, so I mean, Saiyan
Mhm.
Enraged is an insane setup. That
Yeah, bro.
game's I can't believe it still exists. But
Yeah, yeah, it's kind of crazy.
Trying to think what else here. Well, we did talk about some of the different types of locking, for example. So we've spent a lot of time talking about mastery locking, and we're trying to talk about design philosophy of the masteries. Something we haven't actually really seen too much of in the last few sets, I've noticed, is the alignment stuff. It's like hero and villain.
Mm-hmm.
I know there's been like the devious schemes and stuff. Do you guys think going forward, do you kind of like maybe foresee some more of that going forward? Is there really a need for it at this point when we're so heavily invested in trait and mastery locking at this point?
I think they have to be real careful because they could absolutely break Android 16.
I was gonna bring up 16 as well. I don't think it's too bad because I think that if it's something they don't want 16 to have, they can just make it so he can't have it. And I think it's been in the game for so long. You get like the hero and villain version of the ultra rare card in every set. Um, I think it's cool. I think that I don't think it would hurt anything. But like you said, you always have to consider 16. So
I think the only way
He does it
16.
visiting the past. So you gotta.
yeah, fuck that, bro.
Yeah.
Right, Frank?
Yeah, well,
PTP, stay away.
oh, dude, God, playing the set one games again. Yikes. No, I think. Well, here's the thing with 16. Is 16. You look at the card pool. I think the way that you would like break him is where you have tutors and cards that loop, right? And that's the simple way to get rid of that happening is BAU. Well, like let's look at the design of the hero and villain. Last time we got a big boon of heroes and villains cards, alignment cards, was back in Movie Collection 3, where we got the two different types of blocks, and we got the Warp Blast, Concentrated Energy Blast, and I think Cataclysmic Blast was before then. I think it was the previous set or two, but we got a bunch of tech cards. And that's ultimately what it seems like these alignment cards end up being. They're always really techy. We haven't had any like big beater cards. We haven't had like combo cards per se that are like plus. We haven't had +1 combo cards. We've had quality filtering cards with those like blocks and stuff. So I'm not really worried about that personally. At the same time, I think because we've had so many stacks come out and we've had so many like mirroring of things along the alignment path with MPs, for example, like I don't think there's really any differentiation between heroes and villains anymore in a design space. I feel like there's a hero and a villain for every play style at this point, or that it will accomplish something very similar. Now, obviously, there are some specific cases. Let's talk about Enhanced Broly, for example. Is there any hero MP that like does what Broly does in Saiyan? No. I think Saint Namekian, there's an argument that you have MPs like that, but like Krillin, for example, that does a similar thing to Broly. He builds a board state, right? Krillin arguably does it better, and honestly, if Krillin could be played in Saiyan Enhanced, I think Krillin would probably be better than Broly, or at least arguably equal to footing with him for different reasons. You know, he's got his own drawbacks and everything, but he's got stage gain, he's got tutoring, he's got defensive cards, he's got ally support, unpreventable damage. Broly has all these things. He's got crits. Broly has crits. So I don't think that there's really any space for heroes and villains anymore in the design space. I think it's mostly going to just be trait locked. I would prefer to be trait locked over mastery locked. I haven't even touched the trait locking on stuff yet, but I would love to sweep into trait. But I'm curious what you guys think about the alignment thing.
Trying to let you cook, but I think that allies is the thing that comes to my mind first is the access to what kind of allies you have.
I think that's a really good point. I do think there are some specific things that are heroes and villains that are relevant. Although I feel like just with some of the design directions that have been made over the last few sets, that those lines are blurring a little bit. Like, for instance, heroes always had heroic dashing punch. and that was a staple if your physical beats. It was a great way to control anger, and now villains have an equivalent with what's it called?
Not the same.
Vile Beam, Villainous Vile Blast.
Nowhere near the
I
same.
mean,
It's
it is the same.
they're
The
similar.
only difference is one has a stage cost and is an energy attack.
Yeah.
I mean,
Right.
Yeah, but how many people?
The other. Go ahead, Frank.
I was going to say controlled energy. I mean, controlled energy burst, right? Came out, but the fact that it cost stages and it was a freestyle attack, and you didn't get anger, and you didn't get the skip, like very similar. They ultimately accomplish the same kind of goal, but they're downgrades, but they ultimately shoot the same goal.
HTP. The biggest difference, I think, HTP will get you to the next level. It'll cheat you to a level in the form of that skip. Whereas Vile doesn't have the ability to do that. Sure, you can shut down their anger for the combat, but like one of the best thing about VTP a lot of the times is, hey, I can do this. You have to skip. I do something else. I level.
Mm-hmm.
Vile cannot do that.
Would you choose to play a hero though, specifically for HDP though?
I would, especially if my goal was in PvP.
Yeah, I have. I mean, it's a consideration for sure.
Mm-hmm.
Fair.
I'm mad about that, honestly. I've calmed down a lot, but like I was like, man, like this should be raise your anger as well. Like if you're gonna mirror it, just because that's like one of the best things about the card.
Doesn't
I
it?
agree.
Didn't it lower anger or something?
Yeah,
as well?
It lowers anger.
So it's the inverse, because like
yeah,
your opponent still
when you think about it.
Your opponent still skips. I mean, I think it's very. I'm like in the middle, kind of. I'm like, no, I wouldn't say that. I'm more in Brandon's camp on this one. I think ultimately you're playing a dashing punch for the hit effect, but dashing punch also has a place in anger decks. This card is pretty much only being played to stop anger decks because I don't think. I mean, the only like skip based energy stuff going on has only ever really been Kid Trunks. Allied Blitz is a really interesting card in a thought process theory crafting space, but like we've never really seen anybody that synergizes with skips directly the same way that like physicals have. So
if controlled energy burst didn't exist, I'd be right along with you guys. But the fact that that's a card like kind of like invalidates this one in my eyes. You lose so much value from not being able to gain the anger and potentially level. Like it kind of like almost like devalues the skip because like who cares?
Well, I mean,
you know what I mean.
This card at least skips though too, so it's like, oh, I can play this card instead of an anger card. I skip them, then I go play my anger card next action. But overall, your amount of anger is going to be lower. Excuse me.
Mm-hmm.
So,
like, it's good. It's good if you're trying to disrupt your opponent's anger progression. But like any card, like you could have just played like a block that lower their anger one, or your attack that there are attacks that do both. There are attacks that raise your anger and lower your opponent's anger.
Mm-hmm.
So why do I have to play this bad attack essentially because it only does like 3? It's gonna lower your anger 1. You're gonna skip. Like the potential to crit is very far off. You have to have hella mods for that to happen. So it's like, what's the point of this? Just to be the inverse? Because if it's just to be the inverse, then you nailed it. But
I think
a lot less useful.
I mean, I think we keep getting like, and like on that note, when you're talking about like those cards I mentioned that 16 got, right? All these like board hate cards. Like we have a million flavors of the same type of effect in freestyle. Like for board removal, there's like multiple cards that like there's like I was looking through old cards. Implication. You guys remember that card from set 8 Celestial Tournament? Mm-hmm. There's like Woof. There is Reality Check. There's all the tug, the shuffle, banish a thing if it's lifted off the deck cards. Like they all do the same thing. There's benefits to each one and trade offs, and I guess that's kind of where I see like a card like this is like it's like you can float it in the pool with like controlled energy burst and whatever. Obviously, being villains only has synergy with like people like Frost and Android 16 and stuff. But
so let me ask you this: in what situation do you want Vile instead of controlled energy burst?
I like that it doesn't cost 2, and I like that it skips, and I like that it's villains. I would probably only play with people that cared about villain stuff though, because I already don't play controlled energy burst anyway. So,
but who is that? It's only 16, right?
I think
Frost.
Okay.
I think Villainous Vile Blast is strictly better than.
Okay, tell me more.
So controlled energy burst lowers anger too,
Oh, Hit likes
but
this
it
card
costs
too, actually, for what it's worth.
but it costs 2.
Okay.
And so you get the lower anger 1. The skip is really relevant in my opinion, just in general. 2 consecutive actions is just always strong, but I think an underrated piece of it is that all damage is banished, and controlled energy burst doesn't have that. If you're an energy beats deck, I think that's a powerful effect to have, just so that you can, hypothetically, you're not against Piccolo, and the stuff that you banish stays banished. But
Mhm.
I think that's a strong part of the card.
Yeah.
I think I will say this to Wayne's argument. I think when you're playing a dedicated energy beats deck, you're going to value the higher damage more because you're trying to win the game. You win the game by killing your opponent, right? I think a card like Vile Blast is going to find a home in more of a mid-range deck or a slower deck versus a more aggressive deck. I think Control Energy Burst is going to be maybe a more attractive option for those decks, that especially if you have a way to modify it. I can understand that part of it. I still don't necessarily think it's an immediate choice over, but go ahead.
I'll concede that. I guess I'm glad it exists, but I think I'm always gonna have an issue with people putting it on the same tier as HTP, because outside of all the other things that we said HTP does, it also can lead to a potential stage lock, which is going to not only keep them from gaining anger, but also keep them from throwing energies. There is nothing that Vile is going to keep your opponent from doing. After you finish your next action, after your 3
they don't gain anger.
Attack, they're not going to gain anger, but it's the same on. That's the same on both sides. I'll concede that. And being able to everything goes advantage is nice, but after that, it's business as usual. Whereas HTP, they get a skip, you might level, you might stage lock them. There's so much upside from HTP that you don't get from Vile.
It's situational.
Yes, Vile. Yeah, I don't know. You guys win 2-1, but
no, I
hate it.
I don't think it's as good as HTP. I never said that. I
Okay.
feel like I don't want to be slandered here because it's
Who
not
said
as
that?
good.
Somebody said that shit. Who said it? Which one was it?
So I actually thought it raised anger when I first started this conversation, but it lowering anger, that pushed me to the other side. It's not as good.
Oh.
Yeah.
Okay.
So,
All right.
I still think it's good, but definitely not as good. I'm actually, because y'all brought this up, or Frank, I guess, brought this up, I'm looking through just heroes only and villains only cards.
Yeah.
Just for what's relevant. So one card that I always look at as an auto include, and does push me to villains sometimes, is Visage.
Mm-hmm.
I think Villainous Visage is always going to be relevant.
I don't think so.
I don't think.
So?
I think in the first couple sets of the Panini, but at this point, I think Visage has got too much counterplay to it for me to pivot.
Yeah.
But you're going to counter that before you counter anything else.
I mean, yeah.
Yeah, you have to. But there's so many ways to do it now. I was having this conversation with someone a couple weeks ago. It's there are so many different ways to deal with something on the board today.
Mm-hmm.
If I was Krillin, I could Kamehameha it, I could Red Energy Blast it, I could Orange Stare Down it. I'll wait for those cards. If you have to sit there and wait, that's cool. But I don't know. Let me ask you this, Brandon.
Yeah.
How many times does your Visage go off without a hitch?
I mean, it's rare, but I love that card, and I will always put it in the villain's deck.
Okay.
I'll say the ultimate thing I brought this all up is because I guess you can like cards, you can absolutely like cards, but in terms of maybe I should have phrased it better. In terms of a competitive sense, I don't think one side necessarily has the edge over the other. I think there obviously are cards,
So one of the things I was going to bring up is I think some of the styled cards might be more relevant.
For alignment.
Mm-hmm. Mm. Because, for instance, Namekian Hunt is a villain's only card. It enables
that's slug only.
Slug speedball. I know.
Yeah,
I know. It might as well be slug only. That's my point. Because if we ever get an evil Namekian, a villain Namekian that isn't slug,
Red Hustle.
Oh, I love Red
Red
Hustle.
Hustle's
Oh
Red
man,
Hustle's relevant, for
why
sure.
Red Hustle? I wish was not villains only. I'm curious who was going to break that card specifically. Maybe Krillin, I guess.
Hmm.
I don't know.
I feel like there are definitely some hero MPs that could make it happen. Black Diabolic Scheme
Hmm.
is another one that I think is relevant.
Did that card need to be
Yeah.
villains only though? / Android only? Or not Android
Black
only,
Research. Can you imagine
think-
a world where
but Roshi.
Meditative Roshi has Black Research?
Nah, bro.
Oh, but
Choose
are
not
I think
to.
but are any of these
Well,
but are any of these cards on their own good enough to make you be like, I'm gonna play a villain because this card's so baller?
Yes, I would say so. Another one that I'm looking at right now is Blue Overpowering Drill. That's I think part of what pushes Blue Mimicry Boo over the top. It's because that's a really strong card.
I don't think that people build decks like that, though, Frank. I think people like have an idea and they say, "Oh, and I also get this." It's like the cherry on type shit.
I think that's fair.
I mean, yeah, maybe, maybe. I guess it is very singular to be like, oh, looking at single cards. Versus, obviously, I think MP's Masters are more important, but I should say obviously, but I do mean that. No, that's fair. That is a fair point. I guess, yeah.
Knee Clash.
Hmm.
That's
Yeah.
another one.
Now, see, if Vile was like a block, now we're cooking.
Right.
Now we're cooking.
We already
with gas.
we have knee, yeah, I suppose, yeah. Well, I guess I'll look at this, right? I guess to kind of cap this off, I look at Skillful Parry. That's a traded card.
Mhm.
And when that card, especially when that card was not BAU, I was like, oop. When that card wasn't BAU, I was like, I only want to play Namekians because this card exists. Like, this card was such a strong card.
Mhm.
And everybody was playing. It was super meta. Now, you can say the same about Knee Clash to some degree. Like, Knee Clash is very popular as well. I think Knee Clash is maybe a very close equivalent to Skillful Parry. But Skillful Parry, I think, like, I feel like the traded support does more to influence my behavior on deck choice and card choices than alignment.
That's interesting. Because you know what happened to me? I looked at that card and I was like, "Oh yeah, cool, Namekians." But here's also this block that has all this endurance and gives me 5 stages. Let me throw an energy deck.
And
Yeah.
yeah.
So I think
Yeah,
that
that's fair.
Skillful Parry is one of the best examples of the use of traits that we've seen, because that card is so valuable even without the trait, but the trait just pushes it over the top.
No, that's fair. I had multiple people tell me that they were running in energy decks for the Game 5, so that is also a very good point. That card is just already really good, in fairness, but I think, yeah, I don't know, my personal experience. Well, interesting question. Interesting thought. Good points, though.
Yeah. Like, I chose not to play that card in Slug just because, and it took discipline because it's like, oh my god, this card's so good. But it's like, yeah, I can't. Just because like it doesn't add or lend to my win condition.
Yeah.
Like it's not better than like keeping my ball safe or putting a ball on the battlefield, and so like can't do it. But the card is good. But I never said, oh, let me just go build Nail so I can play Skillful Parry, you know?
Oh, goofy.
Well, you sure you don't want to build Nail for Skillful Parry?
Oh man, Nail's dashing attack is a free crit, and we talked about Spiteful. I don't know.
Oh, man.
No. Yeah.
Sheesh, might have to do it.
Well, very fun. Well, guys, very interesting conversations. It's always fun to pick both your brains. I'm glad we also got to talk a little bit before the video happened. So,
For sure.
good to hear from
Yeah.
you both. But
Do it more often. Yo,
yeah.
I've been meaning to tell you this, Frank. There's no A in my last name. My name is
Oh my!
Wayne
Oh, B-E.
Bettis.
Bettis.
Yeah, Bettis.
Bettis.
I'm
You've
sorry.
been saying Bettis for years, and
Oh,
I've been
yeah.
letting you live.
Oh man, gosh.
It's over.
I'm gonna have to go through all my
Yeah.
videos and change it now. That's
I'm going to
funny.
be honest with you. When he said it, I was like, have I been mispronouncing it this entire time?
Nah, it's Bettis, bro.
That's what I thought.
I'll make sure it comes out
Yeah.
correct this time. But guys, thanks so much for being on. We are hitting close to the 2-hour mark, so I'm gonna cut the recording here. And but it is very good to talk with you both again. So thank you.
Absolutely.
Yeah, man, no
Enjoyed
problem.
it.
It's always a pleasure. We should do it more often.
Absolutely. No. Everyone, I've been very much more inspired to work on everything again. So I'm still working on, of course, the history of Panini stuff from players' perspective. I still am looking at that stuff and doing stuff with that. I got to get more games in. And I do enjoy the discussion. Of course, there are new events still happening. There's still a couple of the Kais happening. So you should check out the Dead Zone blog if you're looking to maybe attend some of
Supreme
those.
Kai in 3 weeks, baby.
Yeah, we got February 22nd. I know there's East Kai, I think, just got
2
reannounced
weeks.
for March.
March 1st.
March 1st. So, and then there's, I think, one more event or two after that. So if you guys are still trying to get to some events, please check those out. And yeah, by all means, comments, add to the discussion here and stuff. So, but yeah, again, thank you. Thank you for being here, guys. Take it easy, guys. Peace.
Mustard.